Today, I will cover a number of issues or a number of items, a number of images related to using Silver Efex Pro to make them black and white. And I want to talk about the aspect of what's important about that in the sense of someone recently, early today said, well, what about a color image? How do you know what works, what doesn't work, so on? Well, you never really know, but the aspect of it is that which one has more impact when it hits the screen. When I say that, I often think about I'm submitting this to a gallery or I'm submitting it to a competition. And how would that look the minute it comes up on the screen for them to see? Because when they are judging hundreds of images, they go very quickly through them, very quickly. It's less than a second that it's on the screen. So what is the impact on the screen? And then, for example, this image, this is not mine, but I brought it down from the web to demonstrate a number of things. One is, here's a very interesting color image. And when I took it into, and I have this in the flyer, when I took it into Silver Efex Pro, and I came up with two versions, and we're going to play a lot with the versions today because Silver Efex Pro gives you such a neat way to see different images. But let me put these here, and you see that color image, and then the one on the black and white on the left. That certainly shows all of the detail throughout the tree and even the leaves, but it doesn't have the same impact and depth as that color image has. And even when you look at the other black and white, which has more contrast and shows more of the image in the same way that the color image presents itself, and the black and white is done well, but it doesn't have the same emotional response from me as the color image has because of those beautiful yellow leaves and the soft blue tail part of the fog in the background. And all of that works so well in this color image. So is it something you should avoid? No. And is it a good black and white? Yes, but it's your personal choice at some point to say which one has a more of a personal feeling to you. The black and white here on the right, I think it's a very good black and white of that color image, but the color image has more of an appeal to me because of the feeling of the colors. And one of the things I talked about in the presentation last night was an image should have instant impact. So when it comes to the screen, and I don't just mean because of a competition, but even for yourself, when you're walking into the room and you have it on the wall, does it have that initial impact? And does it elicit an emotion? And in this case, the color image elicits the emotion more to me than the black and white on the right. Black on the right is very well done. All the detail needs to be there. It's good contrast level, but it doesn't elicit the emotion that this color image has for me. And this one is just overall too flat, but it does have a neat look to it. So it's a matter of preference on how you want to show a black and white. The other thing I talked about last week was that before you take an image from a color image into Silver Efex Pro or whatever software you use, make sure that that image, that color image, has all the enhancements that you need to do that makes it stand out. Don't take it into a black and white and then try to do the initial enhancements, because you will do other enhancements on a black and white. You may darken some areas more and so on. And in this case, as you know, I'm very particular about detail in the shadow areas. And on this one, I would open up, so I would use the dodge tool on midtones. Let me see if I have that. Yes, on midtones. And I would open up the shadow areas here a little bit more on this color image because I want the eye to be able to go into it. And Ansel's statement is anywhere in a shadow area where the viewer expects to see detail, there should be detail, including in the highlight areas. Anywhere that the viewer expects to see detail should be detail there. Now, a specular highlight from a white light bulb won't have detail. And if you're looking into the entrance of a mine or something, there may not be any detail. But if the viewer expects to see detail, then it should be there. And a very important thing about making an image black and white is that it has the detail in the shadow areas also. Very important aspect. I want to demonstrate one of these images that represents a subtlety of image related to the number of ways to present it. And this was in the flyer. This image, very striking color image. Some detail down in here, not in there. And if you heard me talk about black and white images or just overall images, Ansel said that if you're using a black area and no detail in it, if you're using it as an artistic aspect of the image, then it's fine not to have any detail in there because the viewer's mind doesn't say, oh yeah, I should see in there. This stands out so well. So I thought, wow, interesting. Let's see how this works in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'll take that in there and explain a little bit more about Adobe Camera Raw. I mean, not Adobe Camera Raw, about Silver Efex Pro. The presets are on the left, and you can do selective presets up in the upper left. You can do modern, recently used, en vogue, all those. I simply, in most cases, have all, click on all, so that I can scroll down and look at all the different presets. On the right-hand side are the various options related to what you can do to the image. And mostly, the global adjustments, brightness areas, and brightness is broken into the 4 categories: highlights, midtone, shadows, dynamic brightness, and contrast, also broken into 3 categories. And structure is the sharpness, so you can sharpen it even a little bit more than what's there. I won't go today into all the other areas because that's not the essence of today. Here's this image as it was brought in, and the preset is 000 neutral. Each of the presets are numbered. And one of my favorites is number 5, because it does a very good job in handling all the areas within an image. And in this case, because that foreground is pretty much without any detail, but if I wanted to see if there is detail in that shadow area, you can come over to the right-hand side, click on shadows, and move it to the right and see if anything appears. And geez, there is some aspect to that. Now, artistically, you see here on the left side, they're beginning to bring out some texture in the sand, but artistically, I prefer, and it's all personal, I prefer having that be very dark because it pushes my eye right up until to the camels walking through the sand. Now the upper part here is a little bright. If I take this back into Photoshop, I would darken that a little bit to keep the eye coming down into the others. But I wanted to bring this one in to show you just playing with the different presets, how differently that presents this overall. And that may be a preferred way rather than this one. And there is no right or wrong about these. And I thought that, look at this with the texture all throughout the sand. How neat that is. You could then take this into Photoshop, darken the camels a little more with a burn on shadows, and they would stand out. So interesting presentation. Come down to number 11. That handles that upper right area very differently, and the texture in through the highlights is handled more. You can come over and brighten those shadows a little bit from the right-hand side over here, brighten those up, brighten up the midtones, and even brighten up the highlights just a little bit more and keep that texture in there, but present this in a very different way. Very creative aspects of these different images. Here's number 15, another one of my favorites. Number 5 and number 15 are often used. I often use them. And here it has that little bit of, in the lower left corner, a little bit of that texture in the sand, and handles that upper portion in the upper right a little differently. And it keeps the main element of where the camels are located as the brightest area of the image. I want to come down to some others here just to show you. Here's using the dark as a very creative aspect. And you think about taking this back into Photoshop and maybe cropping from the top on down so that you are emphasizing the action of the camels and not having that upper part of the image. Very high key, or not high key, but bright, very bright, rather interesting look to that. And it evens out the highlights up through the upper part. I think it's another very good presentation. As I was working with these the other day, kept coming into a number of them, it was more striking than the previous. Now this one has too much black for me, and that little highlights up in the upper right just don't work. Overall, it's just too much. So yeah, we'll look at those. Sepia tone didn't work for me, but it's all personal preference. But look at the different ways that you can present this one image because it has such a diversity of tone. I'll take this one and take it back into Photoshop so I show you what I was talking about on some of the highlight areas. Also, as you see, it's coming back in. Silver Efex Pro creates another layer. The original color image is underneath it. Here's that layer. When I save these, if this was my image, it isn't, but if it was my image and I would go up to save as, when I do that, I would call it black and white and not overlay the original color image. And in that case, I don't need the color image to take up space in that image. So I would delete the color image and that duplicated it. Delete the color image, color layer, and keep only the black and white portion. And in this case, I would come over to the burn tool, put it on midtones at about 14%. Because when you burn, you want to do it a little bit at a time. One of the things I learned in the darkroom is don't try to darken everything right away, because then you can't back off and you have to start over. So I'll just darken this up in the upper corner and just doing the midtones. And you see there's some light rays up in there. And what I'm trying to do is darken that enough there so that you don't tend to go up to that upper part easily or quickly, that when it hits the screen, you are seeing this bottom part. Now, up in the upper left still has a little bit too much highlight in relation to the balance of the tones to the other part of the image. And in the upper right corner, same idea. You want to balance that tonal aspect of darkness. Now, look at how that looks so that your eye goes right to that lighter area. Here's the color image. Black and white, black and white. And notice how the darker area in the top pushes your eye down. And in this case, if I were to keep this black and white, I would probably crop just a little bit more off the top so that that bright area in the upper right wasn't so much. And that sweep of that line coming down, that highlight on the ridge gives me a curve and a curve down here. So various ways to present an image of this magnitude. And this image has so much in it. Could also think about cropping this entirely in a way of presenting this image in a long horizontal. That works. Not as interesting as having all the other part of the image for the eye to roam around, but it certainly is an interesting aspect. So think about the presentation of your image. And I suggest that you do something, save it as a number 2, and then save another one, number 3, and wait a couple days and come back in and look at your images, and you'll see them differently than when you're working on them. We get so literally focused on a portion of the image, and we're not seeing the whole impact of the image as we're working on it. So let it sit a day or 2 and come back and look at
it. John, when you save your images in the PDF format, do you lose your history, or do you have to click a button? I notice there's a layers button, and you usually don't save, but when you save the PDF, then you had all that history when you come back 2 days later. Is it still there when you open that file
No,
up?
you don't. You do not have your history saved. No, you do not.
Okay. I was thinking I did something wrong, so
no.
that's a bummer.
So yeah, that was a good question. Also, I really never save an image. I only save a JPEG if it's something I'm simply going to send off somewhere. You didn't say JPEG, but I don't. So JPEG. Anytime I save an image, I save it as a TIFF.
Yep.
And the reason is that the TIFF is a format that can be used by any software product out there. The PSD is particular to Photoshop data. That's what PSD means. And here's something interesting also, the JPEG versus a PNG. A PNG is a larger file and doesn't do as much compression as a JPEG does. So keep in mind that you don't want to be saving an image as a JPEG and then you intend to bring it back in again and use that to make a print or anything like that. Save the image that you want to make a print as a TIFF. Then you can also save it as a JPEG, and so that you have the quality of it.
When we're working on it, is it the best to just open and close or save it as the PSD file, and then when you're finished, save it as a TIFF?
Either way, the PSD and the TIFF are identical in the number of pixels. I just don't. Well, I have a PC, and if I use the File Explorer, it cannot show me a PSD. It'll show it as show that there's an image there, and it will have PSD in it. But if I have it as a TIFF, it shows me the image. So
yep. Sounds like a licensing issue with Microsoft.
Yeah, of course it is. And so everyone I do is a TIFF. This image of mine is from Yosemite, of course, that's El Capitan. And this, by the way, was a 4-shot panorama, horizontal shots done vertically. So the first one in the upper part, second part, third part, fourth part, and then put together and then enhanced. So I said, make sure that the image has everything the way you want it so that you can take it into Silver Efex Pro to turn it into a black and white. And you'll see how this image works. Again, here is just the neutral, which looks pretty good as it is. And I could make some adjustments over on the brightness side, bring down the highlights a little bit, and that will work nicely. So just bring those down a little, bring down some of the midtones. And that image is starting to work really nicely. My favorite, before I get there, here's number 2. That's just too bright overall. But you could say, oh, I just want to change the contrast. And my point is, play with the images and see how you like them. Don't lose detail, though. See how I'm moving that contrast? I'm losing detail in some of the shadow areas here in the trees. You don't want to do that. So if I come down to 5, see how it has maintained that wonderful detail that I've had in there. And I can even open those a little bit more on the right-hand side by moving that slider. And this is a good representation of that. I want to do a very bright one and then move some of the contrast, that's fine. But I think that this image for me was to have the darker one. And if I increase the sharpness, that even changes that look to that image. Here's number 6. Now the blacks are blocked up. The other one that I talked about was number 15. And it does give me a nice representation of this image. And I then have these sliders on the right-hand side. And if I do this structure a little bit, that is very nicely done. I'll bring this back into Photoshop. We'll compare. Creating the separate layer with the black and white. Here's the color image. Here's the black and white image. And you say, oh, yeah, that looks pretty good. Well, it does, but there are some things now in black and white that are extremely important to control the viewer's eye. And one of them is, even though on the color image, I have a little darker area down here in the foreground and along the top of the sky, when it was converted to the black and white, it's there, but not as strongly. So in this case, I would take the burn tool on midtones and just darken that lower left corner a little bit more to bring the viewer's eye into the center of the image and across the sky, up in there, and the tree, down here on the left a little bit more. They're up in the sky. Oh, got a little too much there. And in fact, it shows me that maybe my color image didn't have that sky handled very well to begin with. But I want to show you the effect of darkening the sky to bring the viewer's eye down into the image, the main part of the image, darkened on the right-hand side. So you think, oh, that was pretty good when it came in, John. Yes, it was. Let me show you these changes. Here's the color image. Here's the black and white. Now watch the subtle changes of the burn tool to control the viewer's eye down into the image. Very subtle, but important in a black and white. Really brings the three-dimensionality of this out even more. I studied with a fellow in Chicago when I lived there. His name is Dan Anderson. His name is Dan Anderson, and he does workshops. But he is the one that taught me a lot about black and white. And this is one of his prints. And he has detail up in the clouds and all those areas. But he up in the upper left is pure black, but all the other aspects are there. And one of the things that struck me is how the foreground leads you into the image. So this was one of his, that was my training. One other one. He was very much a person that wanted detail in all the areas. And look at the contrast range of this image from the highlight area in this cathedral, the foreground area, but all the detail is there in every part of this. And the highlights in the center just jump out. The architecture stands out really well. He taught me how to think about metering a scene. Now, I was shooting film at the time, large format, with a handheld spot meter. So you would meter the darkest shadow area, then you'd meter the midtone area, then you'd meter the highlight area, and then the brightest area. And you would calculate the number of f-stops in between the shadow to the brightest and how you would set the exposure of the camera. Today we look at the histogram and it tells us. But that was what he taught me, and that just stuck in my head related to black and white so much, to show the detail and to show the subtleties of the change of highlights to shadows. Before I go to doing one with putting the sky in, I want to come to this one, and similar to that sand scene that we had, this is flat. There's not a lot of contrast. And maybe that's how the photographer would want it. I'll add just a little contrast to this and show you the difference of brightening this a little bit and then creating darker areas around it, and how much more that figure stands out from the background. Now, in this case, the upper part of the image is too bright for me because that's where my eye goes. And I would want to darken that before I do anything related to black and white. And so I darken that so that the eye is even more so coming down to where I want you to go and to have detail in those areas. And to darken that foreground a little bit. Let's take a look at just those changes. That's much more three-dimensional. Now, I will take this into Silver Efex Pro to do the black and white work. But that sky just isn't working for me for a color image. And probably I would go to cropping this to emphasize the subject and then take it into black and white. But let's take it in first and see what's going on with this image. Let me crop this here. So you want to do the enhancements on your black and white before you take it into convert it to black and white, and then select the different approach. No, that's way too dark. Too much contrast. Number 5, yes, that's nice contrast, but still that sky isn't working for me. And I can increase the contrast a little more here so that I fill in some of those shadow areas nicely. Liking that, I still think about doing the cropping. So not all images as you bring them in are going to do exactly what you want. So when you're thinking about the black and white versus a color, just sometimes the color image is going to be better. That's an interesting approach here. This number 11, let me try number 15 and then I'll come back to 11. Here's 14. Yeah, that doesn't work. 15, a little overall, too bright. Do the contrast. Yeah, that works a little bit. I'll come back to number 11 to play with that one a little more. I like the texture that it's put into the shadow areas. So it's just a personal preference. So I'll bring that back into Photoshop. And in this case, pretty sure that I will want to crop it. Because even though it puts some texture in the sky, the emphasis is on the figure. So I want to do that even more in relation to how that looks. So like this, all this, but this bright area up in the left, we'd darken that a little bit more. Just to, got to get to the correct layer here. Get to have your eye go exactly where I want your eye to go. So darkening that and darkening the upper portion sky so that your eye isn't roaming around up there. Darken the overall foreground or background and that upper right corner, and then down the lower left to force the eye into the figure. So from here, very subtle changes there presents that differently. I want to show you a very interesting way of doing a mix of a color and a black and white image. The more that you learn Photoshop, the more that you will learn about layers. See which one I want to take in, this one. What is that green line? Well, that green line is just a measuring, and if I go up to view and turn off extras, it takes that away. Now, I will convert this one because I want to do a couple things with it in relation to both layers. We'll take it into Silver Efex Pro. Take number 5, preset. Actually, all the different presets here work very interestingly with this image. You can play with this many ways. Let's do this one. Well, maybe not. Maybe this one. Number 6. Look at 15. Yeah, I like 15 a lot. So take it back into Photoshop. You have a color image underneath the black and white, and merging the two often makes a very interesting image in itself. So I will use the black and white one on the top and the color one on the bottom. I'll put a mask on the black and white image. Come over on the toolbar and take the gradient tool. I have the mask selected, and down on the bottom of the toolbar, black in the foreground, white in the background. And I can come over, and since the layer is selected, when I do anything on the image, it is really doing it on the mask. So I'll turn off, in a sense, portion of the image. Ah, there's some color merge. Oh, I think I'd like a little bit more of that. Just bring it over. You see the mask? I'll show you the mask. Here's the mask. So it has a little bit of black. Well, geez, that's maybe not the way I want to do it. So the reason that it has that darker circle is up at the top in the options bar for the gradient tool. I have picked the second one, which is a highlight in the center. What I really want to use is the first one, which says dark to light. Now I'll come back to the image, and now when I bring it across, it will evenly bring that together. How nice is that? So you could actually play with this, with how you want to show the color image into a black and white. Oh, maybe I should take it the other way. So I'll come back to using it this way and having those leaves and things there. So it's just a neat way to merge a black and white and a color together by using the mask on it. Of course, I can also paint on that mask. If I paint with black, I'm turning off that layer. So I would take the paintbrush and paint with black in the foreground. And I can paint on the door, and only the door will show through, because what I'm doing is turning off the black and white layer and allowing you to look through that layer to the layer below, which is the color layer. So now I can merge these two images very artistically by playing with a mask and the gradient tool on the mask, or just painting on the mask. Very creative way to create an artistic image.
John, I have a
Yes.
question. When you were in the gradient tool, could you have also, did you have a choice of where maybe you could put the circle where the door was and
Yep.
gradually do that as opposed to
Absolutely.
painting?
Absolutely. Great. See, now you're already thinking, oh, I could use it instead of that. I could use.
Wondering what it would look like. Yeah.
Well, we'll try it, but you could also use some of these other gradients. Let me go back to that.
Thanks.
Great
Thank you.
idea. Great idea. So we have this. I have the mask, and I'll use the second one up there, and I'll take it from the door area and do it on a, how about that? See, you could actually do this by stretching it in different ways and letting that come out. So that's one way. Another is to use the second from the left and sort of do that on an angle, or you could do anything you want. To see, you really have gotten the idea, and that is you have the ability to merge the two creatively by putting black on the mask. And you can use the gradient, and then you can use the brush and add other aspects, or you could use just the brush, do whatever you want to do to create a piece of art.
How do you do maybe a smart select of just a specific area so you don't have a gradient? I want to select, but I want to let it pick the shape like select subject does.
Well, you could do select subject. I'm not sure what we do in this area, or you could go to the selection tool
Well,
And if
let
you,
it select the door itself.
yes, so you can use the quick selection tool, bring it in sort of small, and just come up through the door and it will select it automatically for you.
And then I want to colorize that.
Yes, so now you come over to the mask, click on the mask, and fill the mask, either paint it with black or go to Edit, Fill, and paint with black or fill with black, and it will turn off the black and white.
Oh, brilliant.
You see, I've just created a monster for you. You will play with this stuff.
You taught this in the earlier class, but it was way over my head back then.
Yes,
Now,
there you
now I'm
go.
retaining it much better.
Now
Thank you.
I would take, this is interesting. That's a neat thing to look at. I would take the paintbrush now with black in the foreground and the mask selected. And instead of having the brush at 100% opacity up at the top, lower it so that it's not really painting black, sort of painting a gray, which means you're sort of merging that, and you can just sort of create other aspects to things. And just play. That, and the tools are the things to understand and understand how to use them. And maybe just do a little bit of the foreground here. But the merging of a black and white, not just by using an opacity on the black and white layer, but by actually making a selection, as you just suggested, filling that with black, painting with black, very creative way to use the black and white image. Ah,
John, this is Jim. Can you select by color if you just wanted to do the green leaves?
yes, you could turn this off so that we are, and select the background and use the magic wand and select all the greens. Then turn that layer back on. You need to clean off the mask first because well, I'll leave the door that way. And I want to fill with black. Turn off the dancing ants. There they are. Now you'd say, well, I want some of the other greens. So when you made the selection of the greens, you need to key in to be sure you got all the variations of the green. But once you have it, and you have the selection, so if I go back here, when I have these, realize, oh, I don't have all the greens, I can add more to it by just clicking on those additional green areas. Hold the Shift key, or the Shift key. Yes, the Shift key. Just keep, well, I'm on the wrong period here. And just keep adding until I get all the various flavors of green. But there are other ways also. You can go to channels and pick up the colors, however you want to get there. But then when you have that stuff selected, you then fill it with black on a mask and it turns it off and it shows the layer below.
Thank you.
Before I go to putting a sky in and do anything, this image, very interesting to me. And it almost is black and white, other than those beautiful color eyes, but it may be very interesting in how that we could present this image as a black and white, but not the full contrast range of black and white. We may want to do this more of a high key. So if you all look at the different ways of presenting it, that's an interesting approach, right? That number two, let's look at some others. Here's number 5, which is the full range black and white. I don't like this image in that full range, but I certainly like this one, that very high key look.
John, can I ask a question?
Yes,
If you were back to the color mode and in Photoshop, if you selected the eyes, 2 eyes, then select inverse and go to Silver Efex, would you still keep the color eyes and then have different black and white effects around it?
Well, I'm going there, but in a different way. So I don't know if that would work as much as I know for sure that since I'm bringing in this layer as the black and
Right.
white, that I can then select the eyes. Use the quick selection tool, select the eyes. And I may even do the beak, but let's do one part at a time. Put a mask on that black and white layer.
Right.
I did the reverse. Put a mask on that. Make a selection. Make a selection. Fill that selection with black. Get rid of the dancing ants. Very interesting. Look, that's really neat. And oh, maybe I'd like this a little brighter. I can keep that layer selected and go to an adjustment, brightness and contrast, and I can adjust the black and white however I want that to be in relation to keeping some of the texture in there and keeping those eyes that way. And oh, maybe I'll add the mask. I mean, add the beak. So I could come down and do a selection on that. However I want to do it, I can even feather it a little bit and fill that with black. Oh, I filled the, I filled the thing.
Bye-bye.
That's why it's good to have history. So there I have that. I want to be sure I have the mask selected. Edit, fill, black. Still not doing that. Doing something wrong. Oh, I thought the beak was in color. I just turned off the color layer. The beak is in black. I didn't realize that. So I would not want that in there. Nothing of interest there. But you see what you can do with this image from the standpoint of taking it into black and white. And here's the open. And that's an interesting image by itself. And I could use levels or another adjustment to do some things to it. But I think having it as a black and white and then having the color added to it makes a very different looking image from it. Just very creative. See, the idea is play with these things. You learn the tools, which I hope I'm showing you how to use them, and not in a very sophisticated way. And they are so neat to do them. Here's a flower image. This is Darcy Pino's image that she shot at Gibbs Garden one time. Oh no, at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. I thought, wow, that's so beautiful as a color image. Well, let's take a look what it would look like. And we can take it in and do various versions of it. And then again, save them as different versions, come back a couple of days later and look at them, because you'll have a different view of how they look. That's an interesting sort of overall lightness. And again, you can adjust the contrast over on the right-hand side, do different things with it. I'm down to my number 5. That's a little too dark in the foreground. And if I come down to 15, I want to show you the aspect of this one related to how that looks and changes the intensity. See, here's number 15. Now, it has emphasized with highlights the lower part of those flowers versus number 5, which is highlighting the upper part of the flowers. So the bottom portion of this image is a little darker and the upper portion is lighter, very subtle aspects. Down to this one to show you the difference. Now I've just shifted the highlights. Now I can change those. I can bring it back into Photoshop and use the dodge and burn tools and change them some. In fact, this is very high key. So let me bring this one in. And I want to adjust this so that those flowers stand out very nicely. Take the burn tool and put it on shadows, which means it will darken only the darkest pixels and come over to the flowers. And I'm doing this at 14%, so not very high, but just enough that I'm creating a little bit more three-dimensionality to the flowers because I'm darkening just the darkest pixels and leaving the other pixels as they were. So I'll show you the difference here. See how those flowers now stand out and are much more three-dimensional.
Mm.
You just play with that, and I'm darkening only the darkest pixels when I burn on shadows. Burn on midtones means of course, I'm darkening the midtone pixels. And if I darken the little upper part of this to bring your eye down into the image and a little bit more down on the bottom part here, here's how the image was open. Of course, as a color. Black and white, and some minor adjustments.
Thanks.
You realize the diversity of the way you can present an image. Amazing. I want to get to this. I run out of time. I have so many more I want to show you, and I run out of time. Here's an image that I want to show you related to putting these two things together. The new feature in Photoshop of replace the sky is so good. Prior to that, in my volume 4, and I've revised volume 4 to use the new feature of replacing a sky, but prior to that, I had this panorama of the sky because I have a panorama of a scene. I want to put that in there. And the way I would then have to do that is to select all, edit, copy. So now that's held in a buffer. And come into this image and do a magic wand, select the sky, select all the various blues in the sky, try to get them down into the various areas here. And then I could do a edit, paste, special, paste into, and it puts the cloud in that selection area. And because it's on a separate layer, I can actually move it around in here.
Right.
Now, so easy to do in Photoshop now. Show that to you. Edit. Sky replacement. There it is. And I've actually added that panoramic sky in here. And the way you add clouds, additional clouds, because the package only comes with a certain number, is you press this little down button here, and then import sky. See the little gear looking thing? If you do that, and then you can import additional skies, which is what I did. And so I have that panorama of sky in here. Here it is here. So now when I do the sky replacement and I have that in there, it just puts it in. And it puts it in in among the tree limbs, everywhere that it should put it, it puts it in automatically. And I can move it around. Bring my cursor over into the image and move it around. And at the bottom part here, you want to say new output to new layers, so that when you come back to your layers palette, you see the sky is on a separate layer and the adjustments are on a separate layer. So I could affect just the sky by clicking on it, go to adjustments. In this case, I'll do levels and move the middle slider because it would move the midtones. So I should have moved that sky around a little bit more. I see I have an open space here, but create a little bit more drama in the sky for this image. Come down to the background layer on the levels on that one and open up the shadows a little bit. So now I have that adjusted. Now when I have all this the way I want it, two ways to move this into a black and white. One is you can click on this little grid work here, or you can go over to image, no, sorry, layer, and come down to flatten image, and it merges all of those layers together. Now I'll take this into Silver Efex Pro. The other way, which is a little more sophisticated, is to click on the background layer, hold the shift key, click on the top layer so it selects them all. And then you want to do what's called a stamp, which is Control Shift Alt. So you hold 3 buttons, Control Shift Alt, and press the letter key, and it puts it in there. I'll find out where it is up in the menu bar for you the next time, but it's just do that. And what it does is it combines all of those layers into a new layer, and it is the one you're seeing. You see, if I turn all those layers off, it doesn't matter because it's seeing the one from the top. Now I'll take that into Photoshop or Silver Efex Pro. Why would you do it that way, John? The reason is that you can keep all of these other layers here. For me, I probably wouldn't keep them. I would have just flattened the image and take it in because I always can come back and do it. Somebody have a question?
John,
Yes.
that Control Shift Alt, the letter is E, as in Ellen.
No, Shift, Control, Option, or Alt,
Alt E.
and then the letter E. So you're holding 3 keys and click the letter E.
I actually do them all at the same time.
John, I would
Okay.
suggest the first way, this is essentially is flattening it and making a separate layer. But
That's
I like
correct.
the idea of keeping the other layers that you created so you can,
Yeah.
I mean, you go crazy playing with variations.
Yes, exactly. Yes. There are so many ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. Another way would be before I merged all these together, I could save this one with all its layers and call it number 1. I could then flatten it, call it black and white, take it into the black and white. So various ways that you could do things. So I have this now all compressed into one layer. Now go up to Silver Efex Pro. And on this one, I think number 5 will look the best, but let's look at number 2. Oh, 2 sort of bright. 5 looks very good.
Yep.
Let's compare 5 to 15 to see that how it shifts the tones a bit. Here's 15. You see it's lightened the foreground and the buildings, but on this image, I think the foreground should be darker so that it pushes you into the image to look at it. So I'll come back to 5. Now I'll bring it back into Photoshop, and I'll make some final adjustments with the dodge and burn. So take the burn tool on midtones and just darken the foreground, just even a little bit more, and the upper sky a little more, so that I'm bringing your eye down into the image, and I'm not creating pure black anywhere. Now I want to open up these buildings a little bit and do the dodge on midtones at about 12% and just open up some of those buildings.
John, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Why don't, since you use that number 5 and 15 so frequently, why don't you put them in your favorites folder in SE2?
Yeah, exactly. I could and should. Yes, indeed. You're right. You're right. You're right.
That would simplify things a bit.
Yeah, so it makes it easy. But part of it also is I tend then to not look at some of the other filters. And I like doing that because I may see something I like and I can adjust it differently when I bring it into photo. So it's just a way of not forcing myself only into one thing. Just lightening these buildings just a little bit more so you see the image. All right, here we are at Silver Efex, we took it in, brought it here. Now watch the subtleties of the dodge and burn. See how much more you key in on the buildings, not the sky in the foreground. Very important aspects of black and white, of where you control the viewer's eye. And it takes a while to get accustomed to seeing this. That's how that image then would be presented.
Can you show the black, color one again, 1 minute?
Yep.
Wow. They're both good.
But this is, here's the black and white, but this is even a better version, see, because
Yeah.
of the dodge and burn. Yeah.
John, I think it would even look better if you would darken the houses on the left-hand side a bit.
Ah, yes, good one. Oh, Jürgen, you're getting too good now. See, yeah, great. I agree.
You taught me.
On midtones to darken those because you want them to be more in the background and have the others stand out more. So here, let's watch the difference of this. From here, very subtle to there. Yeah, works. All right, we're gonna do one more and then we'll close for today because I think this is a very interesting image. I pulled this down from the website, and I've mentioned this before. Go to the number one, the letter X.com, and some really beautiful images there to give you an idea of composition, presentation, black and white, all kinds of things. I thought this would be really an interesting image. How pretty this is as a color image. And yet at the same time, doing some very interesting things related to black and white could make this image stand out differently, but not doing it as the full range black and white as I had talked about with number 5, which I'll show you. But look at number 2, all that high key. And then you, of course, you could do those blue eyes. And I may do that, but just coming down through these various ways of looking at that looks very nice. Number 8, watch the difference of number 8 and number 7. Watch the eyes. See, they jump out even more here than if I come back up to this earlier one of number 2. They're there, but not the same level of effect as those are. Very subtle differences. How many variations here we could create? Don't like that at all. That's interesting. Here's one even more. Nope, don't like the color, the darker areas around the face, because that very light in the overall. No, but the idea is I want you to play with this. I think that's very creative. It's like a drawing. It's a sketching. It's a sketch. So I think that's really neat. Here's this one. No, but let me come back to this one and take this into Adobe Camera Raw. Into Photoshop, and merge the two a little bit. Let me come to the opacity. Multiple ways to do this. Come to the opacity and lower the black and white and allow some of the color to come through. And if I put a mask on that, I can make a selection of the eyes, but I'll just paint them in for this time. Black in the foreground. Could make a selection of the eyes so that they show better. But I'll just paint them in. Look at that image. Wow, striking. Oh, well, maybe do the lips. You play, you create art. That's the idea. Create art. All right, all. Any questions before we go?